people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. This upcoming weekend, the reigning WBC Super Flyweight Champion of Mexico, Lourdes Juarez, the younger sister of Barbie Juarez, is set to return to action in defense of her green belt against journeywoman Deborah Vanessa Gomez.
Sports a professional record of 7 wins, 7 losses with 2 draws.
To keep busy fight if it's anything, to keep the tools sharp and keep the machine well oiled. Lourdes Juarez saw action 2 times last year against her countrywoman Diana Benita Fernandez and Luz Elena Aguilar.
This is going to be her first fight of this year.
Set to go down south of the border. The super flyweight division is a division that stands divided. There are 4 active reigning world champions at this weight. Lourdes Juarez is just one among them, holding the green belt. Her countrywoman, Maribel Ramirez, she holds the WBA title. Argentina's own Maciela Luján, she's got the IBF. Very recently, the WBO title changed hands in the land of the rising sun. Japan's own Tamao Ozawa pried the WBO title away from the then reigning champion, Miyo Yoshida.
Tamao Ozawa is now this division's newly crowned WBO champion.
That's the way it breaks down, that's the way it is. You look at a division like this that stands divided, and there's a reason for it. Not many, if any, of these champions actually have a major promoter behind them to help finance the fights, the big fights, the important ones, like unification matches.
I'd favor Lourdes Juarez over Maribel Ramirez, for example.
Lourdes probably likes her chances against Maribel as well, but how much money would it take to get a Maribel Ramirez in the ring with a Lourdes Juarez?
How much money would it take to get a Tamao Ozawa on a plane from Japan to America?
You see what I'm getting at? You have to be able to make it worth the other fighter's while, and in the absence of a major promoter having ponies in this super flyweight show, this is what tends to happen. The division stands divided.
Stays divided.
I think the saving grace for today's super flyweight division is that very soon Australian amateur standout Taylor Robertson is set to be moving down in weight from bantamweight all the way down to super flyweight. She's going to be in action this weekend, and we talked about that in my previous video. If it's Taylor Robertson's intention to become a world champion at this weight, well, that will bring more attention to it. More importantly, more money.
Not all champions' asking prices are created equal.
These champions, they are happy to stay in their own lanes until the price is right. Some of these fighters are going to be more expensive to get in the ring than others, but some of them, they will bite. Now, Taylor Robertson doesn't look to be on the eve of fighting for a world title just yet. I think she's a few fights out from that, but in due time, in due course, she may yet get one of these fighters, one of these champions, in the ring. I think the weakest link at 115 pounds would have to be Mexico's own Maribel Ramirez. Professional record of 13 wins, 9 losses, and 3 draws. Only 3 knockouts. She really isn't much of a puncher.
The weakest link is Maribel, and the strongest is Lourdes Juarez,
who has reigned as this division's WBC champion since December 12th of 2020.
She's this division's apex predator, comes from a fighting family.
Her older sister, Barbie Juarez, knows a thing or two about the squared circle and being a reigning champion. That being said, Lourdes is going to be in action this weekend, and
I'm fairly confident she's going to hang on to the green belt.
At minimum, she can win a points decision. At minimum, against an opponent with a record of 7 wins, 7 losses, and 2 draws, yeah, I think she'll be okay.
Beyond that, I don't know what she plans on doing. Does she plan on unifying?
Countrywoman Maribel Ramirez can't be too far. They both fight out of Mexico. Even if Maciela Luján is all the way in Argentina and Tamao Ozawa is halfway around the world in Japan, there's still Maribel Ramirez.
She's right there.
Perhaps it will be Lourdes Juarez that ends up unifying this division. Who knows? But right now, it's a division that stands divided. It's a division that needs consolidation. We'll see what happens beyond this weekend's fight. In men's lightweight news, per tweet from Dan Raphael, per source involved in last week's event, Davis versus Romero's Showtime pay-per-view will generate nearly 275,000 domestic buys, which will represent Gervonta's best selling of his 4 pay-per-view events. The replay of the fight will open Showtime's triple-header telecast on Saturday night. And this is more or less what I was expecting. I was expecting a number better than the Isaac Cruz number,
But still short of 300,000 buys.
Gervonta Davis has a cult following. I think that goes without saying. He can draw. On some level, he can. Though I've always maintained the same position.
You're not going to sell 1 million pay-per-view buys fighting guys like Isaac Cruz and Rolly Romero.
Your mentor, Floyd Mayweather, didn't become the biggest draw in the sport fighting those kinds of opponents.
You don't hit 1 million pay-per-view buys fighting the likes of Leo Santa Cruz, Isaac Cruz, or Rolly Romero. You just don't.
Dan Rafael added, for those who keep asking about Gervonta Davis's pay-per-views, Rolly Romero will be about 275,000, Santa Cruz between 200 and 225,000, Barrios 210 to 215,000, and Pitbull Cruz touched over 200,000.
So why did this pay-per-view perform better than the others?
Well, when you think about that Isaac Cruz pay-per-view, there wasn't much incentive for the fight fan to buy it because they likely weren't familiar with Isaac Cruz, a late replacement.
And because he was a late replacement for Rolly Romero, who was facing some legal woes, some legal trouble.
You know, that's the fight that you were building up. That's the fight that you were building towards. And just before, maybe a little over a week, I think it was 2.
Rolly gets in hot water with some girl, and you've got to swap him out for Isaac Cruz, a guy that nobody knows.
And I think they're more familiar with Isaac Cruz now, having seen him against Gervonta Davis and watching him slap around Yuriorki Gamboa.
If they do a rematch with Isaac and Gervonta, it will do better business than the first fight did.
Now that people are a little bit more familiar with Isaac, and some of them have taken a fondness to him, it might do better business than the first fight, but will it crack 300,000 buys? Because what we can see here is that in spite of the Rolly Romero fight doing arguably better business than all his previous pay-per-views, that pay-per-view still hasn't cracked 300,000 buys. And if you pay attention to the verbiage, it hasn't cracked 275,000 buys either.
Dan didn't say it brought in 275,000 buys. He said it will.
At least that's what he was told by a quote-unquote source with knowledge of what the pay-per-view brought in. They're not telling you that it did 275,000 buys domestically. They're telling you it might.
So is it a flop?
Flop in the sport of boxing is one of those words that gets thrown around all too often.
It does.
A flop, and according to Hoyle, flop is when the powers that be end up spending more money putting the event together than the event brings them back.
I'll give you a crude example.
Yeah, raw numbers. If the event cost you $5 million to put together, and once the event is underway, it only brings you back 4, as opposed to the 5 that you put into it, that's a flop.
You lost money. You spent more money putting the event together than it was able to bring you back.
Now, Gervonta Davis's fights and the operational costs for them, the quality of competition, these are not the most expensive guys to get in the ring, you understand. You don't have to pay Rolly Romero what you'd have to pay a Devin Haney, or a George Kambosos, or a Teofimo Lopez, or Vasil Lomachenko. No. Gervonta Davis's opponents will fight on the cheap.
They're not highly touted, decorated fighters. They're not champions.
Guys like Isaac Cruz, Rolly Romero, they're only going to cost you a couple $100,000 to get them in the ring. I think the most expensive opponent Gervonta Davis has ever had to face would have to be Leo Santa Cruz, and I think Leo got a little bit more money than Gervonta did, a little bit more money up front.
When the operational costs are low, the break-even point is easier to hit.
Most of those pay-per-views Gervonta Davis has participated in, he's only getting a little over $1 million. For this Rolly Romero fight, it's reported that he got $2 million up front, $2 million guaranteed, whereas all Rolly got was $500,000.
We are talking about the guaranteed purses, not the pay-per-view's upside.
I'm sure that it had one because the operational costs for a fight like this are low. You know, these are not high-profile opponents that Gervonta Davis is fighting. There's not much of a financial risk. He's not fighting the kind of guys you got to give him $2-3 million, like a Vasil Lomachenko, a Teofimo Lopez, a Devin Haney, or a George Kambosos. He's not fighting those kinds of fighters. But because he's not fighting those kinds of fighters, that puts a cap on how many pay-per-views he can sell, which brings me back to my original point. You're never going to hit 1 million pay-per-view buys fighting guys like this.
You'll bring in enough to keep Mayweather Promotions' head just above water.
Why do you think Leonard Ellerbe is so protective of him, overprotective? He's the only fighter in Mayweather Promotions' stable that can draw anything. They lose him, they're left with nothing.
They tell themselves, why should we pay out of pocket more money than we already do to secure these other opponents?
These other fighters on other sides of the street that have bigger asking prices, why should we worry about securing them when we can put Gervonta Davis in there with a Rolly Romero or an Isaac Cruz and do some good business without the risks?
No, maybe we don't sell 500,000 pay-per-views. Maybe we don't come close to selling 1 million.
But we still make money with minimal risks.
At a minimal risk to our golden goose, because they're only sticking him in there with guys he's supposed to be able to beat.
Gervonta Davis's fans want me and you to herald him as some kind of pound-for-pound fighter for beating the likes of Rolly Romero.
Like we didn't watch that same Rolly Romero get a gift decision over Jackson Marinez.
Jackson made Rolly look pretty bad. That's what he did. He made him look bad. Whereas that same Jackson Marinez got dog walked.
Richard Comey made Jackson Marinez look pretty bad. He stopped him.
Richard Comey himself was stopped by Teofimo Lopez, was ragdolled by Vasil Lomachenko. And you see the strategy. You see what I'm getting at. There are levels to the game. Rolly Romero at best is a C, maybe a C.
The guy's a D-class fighter.
Like me some Tank. He looked good in that knockout, but Raleigh was touching him a lot more than I thought he would. And I don't want to hear when I heard names like Shakur Stevenson. I think Shakur outboxes this kid, and I think he's in real fights with the upper echelon of the division.
Here's what I thought about Tank Davis and what concerns me. And I do believe he's a really good fighter. Someone has pointed this out to me. If you're an elite fighter, you know what you do? You don't lose that many rounds. If you go back to the last...
To a Raleigh Romero, you don't.
Or to a Mario Barrios. Or to an Isaac Cruz. What the upper echelon elite fighters do is that they absolutely blank the good fighters.
Yes.
He doesn't really blank them. Like you said, he gets touched.
Even Leo Santa Cruz, a much smaller guy, was having some success in there.
What, if you go back up to 140... Ooh, that's going to be tough.
Oh, no, 140, forget about that one. I'm telling you, even at 135.
Very valid queries and concerns coming to us by way of the 3 knockdown rule, Mario Lopez and Steve Kim.
Steve said it best. You're not supposed to lose rounds to a Rolly Romero.
Mario Lopez quite adequately added that guys like Rolly Romero and Leo Santa Cruz, Mario Barrios, these guys are not supposed to be having success against you.
But before you knocked them out, they did.
Tanks fans will never say it. They'll never admit it. In their own mind's eye, Tank wins every single round of every fight he's had with these guys. Or
they view it as being negligible because he knocks those guys out.
They'll act like Rolly Romero's jab wasn't flustering Gervonta Davis. They will ignore this because Gervonta ends up knocking a Rolly Romero out. But why'd he knock Rolly out?
Because Rolly's not a world-class fighter.
World class. World fucking class. That title is neither proven nor earned. Rolly Romero got himself knocked out by a mistake that he made. He threw the same combination in sequence, the same irresponsible combination, and I will admit, Gervonta must have some ring savvy to have capitalized on it, but guys like Shakur Stevenson, they don't make those kinds of mistakes.
Shakur Stevenson is by far and wide one of the most defensively responsible fighters in the entire sport of boxing here today.
No, he doesn't make those kinds of mistakes, the kind that Rolly Romero did this past weekend, and before that, the kind of mistakes that Leo Santa Cruz made, throwing the same punch 3 times in sequence, only so when you let it go the 3rd time, this kid's figured out your timing and he plants an uppercut on you.
Guys like Shakur don't make mistakes like that.
The guys that Gervonta Davis actually fights, they make those mistakes, and that's why they put him in there with those guys. Gervonta Davis's fans will never admit it. They don't even want to admit that his pay-per-view didn't crack 300,000. They're now starting to fabricate their own numbers, their own pay-per-view buys based on their quote-unquote sources.
What fucking sources? You're not a journalist.
They want to believe that Gervonta Davis is on the level. They want to believe that he's better than he actually is, that he is in fact a pound-for-pound fighter when
his resume doesn't tell that story.
And this illusion is easier to maintain so long as Gervonta Davis and his opponents occupy the same space. They all live inside of the same biosphere, the same bubble.
Doesn't fool me.
Leonard Ellerbe, people over there at Mayweather Promotions. aren't going to risk that bubble bursting by paying to play against a Vasyl Lomachenko, a Teofimo Lopez, the winner of Haney versus Kambosos. They're not going to risk their bubble bursting paying to play with one of those guys when they have cheaper alternatives that protect their investment, not endanger it.
You know, Shakur Stevenson's a southpaw like Gervonta Davis, so Gervonta wouldn't have that advantage.
They'd be on equal footing in that department, but Shakur Stevenson is a pure boxer, whereas Gervonta Davis, he's more of a boxer puncher.
Your boxer's got the advantage over the boxer puncher.
A guy as economic as Gervonta Davis, who's not a combination guy, not a volume guy,
He picks his punches and looks to counter.
waiting for the other guy to make mistakes so he can land hard, counter the guy, then jump all over him. But what happens when you're in there with a guy like Shakur Stevenson who don't make mistakes? You ain't got no southpaw advantage on him. You ain't got a size advantage over him either. He's a bit longer than you are.
I don't think Gervonta would have the edge in speed either.
Gervonta Davis's whole thing, his whole angle is waiting for the other guy to make mistakes, waiting for that window of opportunity. But what if that window don't open? Because a guy like Shakur don't make mistakes. The mistakes a Rolly makes or a Leo Santa Cruz. What if you're in there with a defensively responsible outside jabber with speed and length like a Shakur Stevenson?
What if you don't land that Hail Mary left hook because he don't give you the opportunity to throw it?
Floyd Mayweather, Leonard Ellaby, they know what he is. They know what his limitations are. That's why they match him the way they match him. And that's why Gervonta Davis ain't going to sell 500,000 or 1 million pay-per-view buys fighting these guys, but they're okay with that.
His fights don't cost that much to put on.
They're not losing money because he's not getting much money up front, and his opponents are getting even less than he is. So as far as financial risks, there aren't many, if any.
I see people get into full-on arguments about what Gervonta Davis would do to this guy and that guy.
As if he has the kind of track record to where he'd fight this guy or that guy who's over there on that side of the street.
Even after his own handlers said they're keeping everything in-house.
You know what's going on? What it is that they bought it. They bought the illusion. They bought the smoke, the mirrors, the whole fucking production. They want to believe it so much so that some of these guys are actually manufacturing their own pay-per-view numbers because they just can't accept that this kind of matchmaking ain't the kind of matchmaking that'll crack 300,000 buys. They see him in there with a Rolly Romero and they want to jump out of their skin with excitement.
What the hell are you so excited about? It's Rolly Romero he's fighting.
They want to believe it. They want Gervonta Davis to be something more than just a pugilist, something more than just a boxer. So they're willing to lie and stretch the truth, embellish it, manufacture statistics and metrics to make him seem like a bigger star than he actually is. But what they won't do is demand that he fight in the big
If
fights.
you start demanding that Gervonta fight some of these guys that ain't with Mayweather Promotions, they'll call you a hater.
For being a boxing fan, for being a fucking boxing fan, demanding of Leonard and Mayweather Promotions the same thing that you demand of any promotional outfit and every promotional outfit that's out there, for demanding that the powers that be make the fights. Gervonta Davis has the potential to be a much bigger draw than he actually is here and now, but what Mayweather Promotions wants him to do is settle into the mediocrity of their biosphere, the bubble they want him to live in, because they're afraid of what will happen if they let him loose.
Let him loose? You mean they're afraid of what will happen if they let somebody inside of their bubble?
It'll burst.